So my question was, how has climate change affected mammals in the polar regions? What even is climate change? Climate change is when the pattern of temperature and weather shifts for a long period of time. The greenhouse effect is the most common issue with climate change. Heat is radiated up to the atmosphere, but it gets trapped by the greenhouse gases. In other words, the gases that are trapping the heat are acting as a blanket wrapped around the Earth, preventing them from escaping the atmosphere and essentially making the Earth's temperature much hotter. In January this year, Europe had its warmest January ever. North America and Africa had their January ranked in the top 10 warmest on record, and overall, temperatures covered 3.6% of the world's surface. At this rate, temperatures will only continue to rise, and soon there will be irreversible damage done to the Earth. For example, the majority of Antarctica and the Arctic are made out of glaciers. The rising temperatures will soon start to melt the ice in these areas, causing sea levels to rise and will slowly cover all of the coastal cities around the world, shrinking the amount of land that will be available. The exact time for how long this will take to fully melt is unknown, but regardless of this, it is proven that they've already started to melt. The thawing ice can have harmful effects on the sea levels, but animal life as well. Arctic and Antarctic animals are both being heavily affected by the loss of these glaciers. Without having a habitat, these animals will be unable to survive. Polar bears are one example of mammals that are being affected by climate change. Without having land to rest on, these animals use much more energy having to stay afloat in the water. While polar bears are strong swimmers, capable of swimming for hours on end, they find swimming much more energy intensive than walking. As such, sea ice is crucial for polar bears to survive, says Professor Andrew DeRocher, an expert in polar bear ecology and conservation at the University of Alberta. Seals, penguins, and whales, mammals who live in the Antarctic, are also affected by climate change. The less sea ice there is means less krill. Krill is a small crustacean that is dependent on sea ice because it provides an important source of food and shelter for these creatures. This is an essential form of food. Less sea ice means less krill, which ultimately takes away a vital food source for these Antarctic animals. I connected my question to two artifacts: The Migrant Mother by Dorothea Lange and Urban Evolution: How Species Adapt to Survive in Cities by Eric Bender. The photograph Migrant Mother by Dorothea Lange portrays adaptation. This photograph was taken in 1936, around the time of the Great Depression. As seen by her facial expression, one can infer that this woman is wondering what to do next in her situation. She had 3 children as well as herself to provide for, and because it was around the Great Depression, all families were struggling. In other words, she had to figure out how to adapt to what would be her new life, similar to how mammals have been adapting over time with climate change. However, human adaptation is different from animal adaptation due to the qualities humans are born with. Humans are given the ability to change and learn new ways based on what is necessary to survive. Animals, on the other hand, adapt to situations differently. It comes down to whether or not the creature was born with the ability to adapt. For a hypothetical example, polar bears are great swimmers, but not every polar bear is going to be a champion swimmer. The more ice that melts in the Arctic means less land there will be for polar bears and more time they have to spend in the water. Because some polar bears will be stronger swimmers than others, the weaker ones will not be able to survive long periods of time in the water. The strong swimmers will outlive the weak and have the chance to reproduce, giving the next generation of polar bears the ability to be excellent swimmers. Polar bears and animals in general do not have the complex brain that humans were gifted with, let alone the capabilities to figure out how to get around dilemmas in life, which is why animals' way of adapting is passing down traits when they reproduce. The magazine Urban Evolution is similar to the animals that are forced to adapt in the polar regions. In the magazine, it discusses how living things are adapting or evolving to be better fit for living in big city environments. As time goes by and animals reproduce, different qualities become more important and helpful than others, until the imperfect traits are not as common anymore. Studying animals, such as rats, in the city can be useful to learn how mammals adapt and evolve in different settings. It is much easier to examine a rat in New York City than it is to study a polar bear in the Arctic. However, these researchers' information about mammals in the city can be used to learn about mammals in the polar regions, how mammals in the polar regions are affected by climate change. For example, One of the reasons climate change is having such a huge impact on seals and penguins is because it's taking away a vital food source. Researchers who are studying these rats in big city environments can examine the rats and determine if the food source varies based on the city and how rats adapt to these changes. How rats adapt to these alterations could potentially be similar to how seals or penguins adapt to their environment and food source diminishing. It is important to know what the long-term effects will look like for animals with regards to climate change around the world and urban evolution within cities. In conclusion, mammals in the polar regions are immensely affected by climate change. It takes away their food sources, habitat by melting the ice, and forces them to survive in the water for long periods of time. The Earth is constantly changing. Due to the complications with the atmosphere, the planet is unable to release the amount of heat it contains. This is the main reason as to why temperatures have been increasing. Mammals have had to learn how to adapt to these changes over time, which will slowly start to show in the future as they reproduce. The next generations will be slightly different than what they are now, and climate change is going to have a major impact on these changes.
All right, thanks. A couple of questions. Did your research go in a different direction than you originally expected?
Yes, my research did go in a different direction than I expected. Although my question was always going to be about climate change, it was originally only about Antarctica and animals that can be found there. But as I researched, I realized that it would help further my knowledge to talk about mammals found in both Antarctica and the Arctic, which is why I changed my research question to how has climate change affected mammals in the polar regions to talk about both.
Okay, thank you. What are the implications of your findings to the community?
My findings prove that climate change is affecting not only our community, but the entire world as we know it. Temperatures are slowly increasing every month, and this is harming wildlife and the atmosphere. Polar regions are supposed to stay at freezing temperatures. Animals who have adapted and evolved to these temperatures, such as polar bears, penguins, seals, and whales, are losing their habitats and food sources. If humans continue to destroy the earth, these issues will become irreversible, and we will begin to see more wildlife going extinct.
Okay, thank you.